All right.
Okay. As I was saying earlier, Nick and I talked last night. And Nick, give an introduction, what you want to just touch on what you want to do.
Yeah, so what I was going to do was try to give you as much of an overview and include as much as I possibly could about how this is all connected. So we talked about beginning. I wanted to start at beginning, show you the progression and expansion from that, and then show you the return to that. And I wanted to connect as much as I could with science, technology, all that, because
Will you run home and grab some
everything
speakers? I'm going home.
and everything is free. So in terms of what I was going to cover, down, and then it's quite a bit of stuff, I imagine. So let's see. I will be covering. I remember when I first drew that thing on the board or on my screen actually a couple of weeks ago. I will be basically starting with that. As everything expands from that point, I'll be explaining what that point is, the symbolism surrounding it, symbolism of all kinds of things, but most importantly, the symbolism associated with religion and specifically Christianity, and then going back to Egypt and talking about that a little bit, because everything comes from Egypt, or from what Egypt used to be, and still is in some places, but it's something that's happened over time in that the original knowledge of what truth was has, for lack of a better term, degraded, has been influenced by our ego and fractionalized and become chaotic and confusing. And that same thing has happened to many different things. But that's all part of the process of growth. Because as you, when a single cell divides, it gets more complicated and confusing and chaotic, but that's not necessarily the state it will always remain in. So something happens when it reaches a certain level of complication, and that thing that happens is critical mass. So, as we discussed before, critical mass is not quantitative, it's qualitative. And what we are experiencing now in the world is the results of the exponential increase in the speed in which we are approaching critical mass in terms of what we believe our ability to affect change in the earth will be. So I was going to touch on everything associated with that as much as I could. And I wanted to do it with the purpose of trying to get to. Are we still there?
Yeah, we're still here.
Sheldon's making it better.
And I wanted to do it with the purpose of trying to get as much understanding out of all this stuff as possible. And understanding in terms of how it's all connected, what it means in terms of your own experience, and what it means in terms of our experience. So, I don't really want to get into exactly, or I don't want to get into it how I want to get into it until we have some time to just sit and do it. But up until then, any questions related to what I did last time, or anything at all, we can just go from there. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions, just in general, or if you remember what I did last time, I went through that thing on the board? can do it like specific things, I think, and then just explain those specific things. If you can remember any or any new ones that have come up. But in terms of the whole scope, the whole overview, I'm gonna wait till we have a good chunk of time and a bunch of people to do that. People who,
Your description of the gathering itself.
okay.
Because you said that you're going to start with the beginning, right?
Yeah.
And the whole concept of gathering, except I wonder if that's if that's understood or having a sense of what beginning is and where we came from. Because if we don't have a sense of beginning, the question is, we have a real sense of where we are.
Right.
So, what made me think about it was when you said beginning, we had talked about it a few weeks ago, in the beginning, just the word was that word would go. But also related to, in the beginning, creating. That's not what I said.
For security purposes, this call has been terminated. Please contact your moderator and verify the time and date of your conference call.
So, I guess the idea was to understand that, or then questions about what beginning is, what beginning originally.
And I just want to throw in that's exactly those two verses are exactly what I wanted to are included in what I wanted to talk about as well, because those two are related. Anyway, if anybody has anything else or any questions about that.
Well, if not, then here we go.
Okay.
Well, I think we're a bit distracted by the technology here.
Yeah.
Oh, well, if nobody's really gonna worry about this, turn it off.
Yeah.
Then, other than the
To
other.
skip setup this one time and go directly to your mailbox, press the star key twice. To begin your setup, you should first select a...
There you go. Okay, we're good.
It was an online conference call thing. That you could look it up, but I don't know what you guys use down there. Anyway.
Action comes from you. So anyway, I'm the distraction. Take it.
Okay. So let's do that. Let's begin with the beginning. So when we talk about beginning, what we are talking about has a
There you go.
meaning associated with everything that is part of our experience. So it has a spiritual meaning, it has a physical meaning, and everything in between and besides that. So when we have been talking about returning to beginning, we have been talking about reuniting or reconciling all of the apparently separate pieces of experience and of reality that we experience. And this is related to our very purpose for existing in this world. So beginning is the fulfillment or the return to the original state that was before anything that could be called a thing came into existence. So one of the things I wanted to do, and I guess I can start with it actually, and then come back to it when we do the full thing eventually, whenever that happens. But is look at those two verses. So Genesis first and John first, because those two are related.
You mean Genesis 1:1?
Yep, very first one.
And John,
Yep. Very first one. Because there's no telling how deep you go into it, but included in each one of those is the whole process. So you're dealing right now with the implications or ramifications of being in a state of relative ignorance of what happened. So let's look at the first. I can pull it up on my computer screen. So Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created heavens and earth. So that verse contains way more meaning in it than its English translation leads us to believe that it does. So it's typically translated in the beginning. But if you will permit me, I wanted to look at it how it's actually presented on the page. So how it is actually presented is the beginning creates Elohim. That is actually what happened. So does that make sense? At least in terms of the order of those words. Because in Hebrew is Bereshit Elohim. Creates Elohim.
Nick,
Uh-huh.
also it actually, the whole verse says, began created Elohim, created heaven, created earth.
It's working.
Yeah.
So actually, it doesn't, God did not create heaven and earth.
What did you not do?
Yes, sir.
Do you see that?
Yep. Does that make sense? Everybody?
say it again.
Repeat that again.
Say it again.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we
Now we
can.
can.
No.
You're full volume now, so we're, I think,
Okay.
Oh, okay.
reacting to that.
Oh, I have my microphone muted. If you look at it in terms of how it is actually written, just like Pastor Richard said, beginning created God, heaven, and earth. In terms of how we conventionally translate that, God, quote unquote, did not create those things. And that is confusing and definitely contradicts what we normally hear. Because it's talking about spiritual truth, or in terms of reality, it's talking about the actual process of bringing what we consider physicalized matter into existence. So, talk to me. What's your reactions to that, if any?
Well, what are you saying? In the beginning then was differentiation. This is the beginning of differentiation.
Yes.
I think we began with the womb, out of which all of it came.
Right.
Well, I mean, the point of beginning came from what we don't really have adequate language maybe to express, but an undifferentiated totality, right?
Esau.
Yeah. but I mean, yeah, so try to define insult, we're back to that problem, right?
Right.
How do you define totality, I guess, for want of a better term? You can't, so then we have it on the board. So we have then beginning, and the package, so to speak, that came with beginning is what Nick just differentiated.
Or not so much the package that came with beginning as it's the package that came out of beginning. Because
The package that is beginning, yeah, it's
it's a
fine.
point, and it goes like exponentially like a cone. Like a cone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but in that sort of Big Bang instant, you had
Yes.
all that is, that we now understand is differentiated from, and soft, which was undifferentiated, right?
Pretty much.
Pretty much, okay.
Right. So what I actually wanted to do by starting with that was explain what that means in terms of what you experience. Because everything is an expansion outwards from what is in you. And we live in a flipped inside out experience. So the original expansion from the point is the process of creation. Turn to that point, or what came before that point, is the process of enlightenment.
And
So,
but Nick,
let me
by
know.
return,
say
by return, you're talking about, what do I want to say, reestablishing in a profound way the connection, right?
That's what Jesus called be born again. Born is born, and again is beginning. So it's returning to beginning, which does entail, I suppose, reestablishing the connection. Becoming aware of what your roots are, where you came from.
Well, yeah, by establishing a connection, I mean, it's like plugging in the cord so that there's that current. It's an awareness or an intellectual understanding. It's a connection. And almost the analogy for me is like electric current. Is that fair?
But
yeah.
I think connection don't quite do it because connection lends itself to a belief that there is a disconnection, which is separation. When the separation in itself is an illusion.
Yeah, but the power of that illusion influences the differentiated reality that we understand.
True, but it doesn't change the reality that exists.
Yeah, but you step out in your truth, right? And
Well,
that,
even stepping out in truth, but truth itself is not, we speak of your truth, but truth is actually universal. So it's not as much of a differentiation in truth as there's an understanding that we're all connected. And that's exemplified every time we say the word infilling of the Spirit or Holy Spirit. That in itself talks about connection. I mean, on what? The unicity of everything without any instance of being disconnected at any time whatsoever, or even without the possibility of being disconnected.
well, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's the perception. But the power, the energy in the perception is it influences how you conceive of yourself, you know, you versus it, whatever you want to call it, instead of having that inner understanding that you are it. You and it are, well, for one of us.
And that's exactly why I say baptize him in the name of, because name talks about the awareness that There is no disconnection. The name also speaks to the idea of you remembering or becoming aware of who you were from the beginning, even simply by the mention of that name. So the baptizing in this instance has nothing at all with water, and everything to do with baptizing someone with conception or the conception of the beliefs of truth.
And what that actually reveals to us, if we look at it in the order that is actually presented, is that that experience of separation or illusion is something that we taught ourselves. So we convinced ourselves of it and lived and are living within the reality that we built, which is a mental and spiritual one. So we have to unlearn what we taught ourselves to realize that connection has never left. So
look inside the phrase "what we taught ourselves," though. Isn't it any place you can read and understand that the world? Okay, these things are really looking at the same thing from two ends, I guess. But if it's the world we operate in this form, so to speak, there are certain principles or understandings that would appear to operate in the world. It's all connected to how we perceive it, so it's not quite that either or. But it's as if we came through a tunnel, to me, in a way, and now we're into this reality, which we try to understand. We try to understand the principles of, and because the sensation we've allowed to be weaker and weaker and weaker, that's made all these realities stronger and stronger, and we've lost a sense of where they really come from or what they really mean. And science tells us in every generation, no, we got that wrong, there's actually a new understanding, etc. So we're kind of confused and we're making this sort of, you know what I'm trying to say? We're putting weights onto things that aren't necessarily the intended weights, for a better way to say it. Because we're operating so much from a sense that we need to get in control of this. But we're looking in front of us. We need to get in control of what's in front of us and not sort of as an analogy thinking that we have an umbilical cord, kind of, which will help us understand all that, if you know what I mean. So then we're into making ourselves more important than we are, more separated than we are intended to be, etc., and stepping out and creating more reality based on that, from that perspective, from that point of view. Which is the same thing as a circle. It's trying to create a pot, thrown it from its center, if you know what I mean. So as it spins around, it's off center. Okay.
Well, I see the advances that are making us weaker in terms of our awareness. For example,
But that
we look at technology. You can have the technology to heal somebody's body, but you don't have the humanity to take care of them once they're well. So the technology actually weakens us in terms of who we were created to be, and as a result of not being aware of it, all these things happen, like drug addictions, greed, lust. All these other things happen because we are trying to fight our way back or create a place of comfort. And we are only to find out that the only place of comfort is indeed beginning.
Yeah, I think that the church and these other ideologies are there because they seem to give us comfort. But again, it's an imposed. We're trying to internalize something we get from what's external instead of having the courage or the quiet or both to start the journey over again, if you like, inside. So all and we've given more weight, increasing weight to technology and things to solve these problems for us, to define the problems and solve them for us, which is okay if you're operating from that base where you know who you are. But if you're not, then you're gonna go whatever direction that technology and those theories seem to tell you those realities are. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Yeah.
You just described what it means to be born again.
Well, that's the thing. So the question is, if it's a legitimate analogy about throwing a pot, and we're the vessel, right? We've thrown ourselves off center, and the question is, how do you find a center again to fix the pot? And we're thinking, I don't know. I don't know how far to take the analogy. But you can't fix a pot that's off center unless you go back and put your hands right down at the core and the bottom of that pot while it's spinning and center it from that point outward again. You can't just fix the walls while they're going around out of center. And that's kind of what we're trying to do, I think, more often than not. And then I'll be quiet.
And that's the sense of brokenness, isn't it?
The sense, I'm sorry, what?
Brokenness. The pot was made off center, so the walls are not right, so you break it and start over again. That's the sense of broken spirit. Because we've been off center, so you become broken, so you can be put back together again.
So we can start anew.
Right.
It's not put back together so much as start anew. We're trying to fix it while it's spinning around off center. And if you've ever tried to fix a pot that you haven't centered well and then you pull the walls up, it's impossible to do unless you go right back down to the bottom of the pot and restart over. Yeah.
I want to make that comment, Richard. I think in terms of recovery, when we talk about, this talks of spirit journey, it talks about brokenness. And I think one of the, I guess, concepts or beliefs that people have is that they are separated from God. And when it talks about, a particular statement, in the spiritual journey in terms of addiction, it says we admit that we are powerless over the separation of our life, and that, again, in terms of people realizing we've never been separated from God. We made the decision by free choice and free will, to say, that we're separated, but the reality is that. But I think we have to go back to the beginning to realize, who am I? And what is my, who is my substance, my supply and support? And I think that's part of that brokenness that we talk about in terms of when people speak in terms of recovery. That, again, people admitting that they are powerless over the separation from God and that their life have become unmanageable. But the reality is we're never separated from God. Because if we are Elohim, you know what I mean? But I think that's the importance of going back to the beginning and appreciating, as you say, we recognize who we really are. And I think this is the important point, going back to that beginning to reconnect.
Right.
Well, I
So-
think,
We have to let ourselves to do a little struggle. Yeah, I mean, in order to do that, we have to go back to the beginning. If we don't go back to the beginning, nothing up, nothing around that. That's it. This is it. And my name is Brother I am.
welcome. I guess. Hey.
How you doing?
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure who made the comment before, but I think that whole issue, the whole discussion about free will is another discussion. I sometimes think I've been influenced by some reading I did that I almost think it's like the Ten Commandments and Sharia law, that if you're really connected and you're not following, but you're living that sense of unity, none of those laws have any application or they're necessary. They're just there for those who are off center, because didn't Paul say you can either spend your life struggling to obey 1, 2, or 3 of these 10, or you can burst through the whole thing and not need any of them, right? So that whole free will thing is another discussion, because I don't think we operate out of free will. Because to operate out of free will, you have to be calm and connected. And then it's a much more complicated concept, I think, than we understand. We think free will just means do what you want, but it's much more profound than that, I think. But I think that's another discussion. But yeah, still, so the big question is, how do you get back to the beginning?
Yes.
What do you do to be reborn, so to speak, or whatever however you want to frame it?
Well, I know this is Nikki, by the way, I'm sorry, but I know we may not necessarily want to go there, but what he just said kind of formulated the question I had. I do believe that free will exists, and that's why we're in this earthly realm now, because we wanted to experience ourselves outside of the whole, the beginning. And the only way to even remotely imagine that we could do anything outside of the beginning, which isn't true, was to create a place, a third dimension, an area in which we could kind of experience ourselves in the way we felt we could, only to find out now that it wasn't such a great idea to try to experience yourself in an area where you felt like you were separated. Does that make sense?
It does, and the whole idea of we live now, we're not actually experiencing free will. We actually live based upon coercion and undue influence in such a subtle way until we don't recognize it.
Right.
Yeah, because I think the concept of free will doesn't have a concept of guilt built into it. And that's what we have now. We're off center, so feel guilty about it. And, that's trying to fix something that's wrong, which is the most complicated way to look at a problem. Instead of what's a better way, trying to fix it first, and that's just a big distraction. That's why I say it's another sort of misconception, I think. But
Nick, you better talk before you burst.
Yeah, I would have to be that when I get there. Yeah, free will is another whole, but it is related. So, free will is about what you want, and you don't realize what you want until you begin to know yourself a little bit more than most people do on a conventional surface level. So, if we react or respond or whatever to our egotistical desire, within the little bubble of ignorance that ego allows. But whatever. So, beginning is a return to beyond. It is the reincorporation into your conscious experience of the totality of who and what you are that exists above and beyond your egotistical self, or the self that is defined by your desires, let's say. Because your desires connect you to things. And that's what they're for. So when we pursue the things of our desires, we are in some ways bounded by what those desires lead to. But anyway, does that make sense?
Yeah, what you described is, again, unless you're born again, you can't receive the kingdom. So when you're at beginning, that's the purpose of it. So you can perceive, or so you can see what the kingdom really is, so that you can govern yourself accordingly. And the kingdom, not talking about some geographical location that's ruled over by some individual or individuals, as much as it is talking about the concept by which we were created to be governed.
Yep. And related to that, the process of how you even get there is by allowing what is deeper within you or what is higher above you to influence you, as opposed to you constantly trying to use what you are familiar with to get at it. So what that means is, I'm going to draw something too, but what that means is, so we are so used to using our intellect and our ego to attempt to solve this problem. And the problem is that we feel lack. So the way that you get rid of lack is allow what is in you to fill that space that is created by your ego itself, not to use the ego and the intellect to attempt to put things in that space. So beginning is a return to beginning, rather, is allowing that source to fill the space that you create. And the space that you created is difficult, or the space that you are supposed to create is difficult to create because it requires that we clear out we clear and calm our mind and spirit. And what that means is focusing on all those disparate, chaotic aspects of this experience that we actually introduce because we don't have the capacity to intellectually keep all the different little chaotic points of our experience in one state at one time. So all our thoughts are always going every which way in that. We have to learn to be quiet enough to give what is there already space, the space, to make its presence felt.
Just when you talked about creating a space for those concepts, rather than trying to create the concept ourselves. That's what we call the quote unquote Lord's Prayer is designed to do. Create that space. If you read it in context of the Aramaic, it talks about creating that space that's necessary for us to be empowered by being empowered by our Creator, as opposed to us being creating the Creator.
Yes.
So that's the whole idea. How far we're trying to live, etc. It shows us how to create that space. But what we've done, we've taken it we treat it like it's a home, as opposed to as a ray of life, a light, or an opportunity to rid ourselves of all those all of the confusion that lends itself to give us the sense of being separated.
Right. Because what that is a pathway from beginning down into whatever this is, and by recognizing we actually connect to it.
But I would, I'm just being a little picky this morning, sorry, but the only thing I would say, Pastor Richard, is, well, no, it's just the Episcopal brain using, I guess. Anyway, it's the idea of the poetry do with the Lord's Prayer. Because what's the difference between the written narrative and poetry? It's all the meaning in the words. So I think we recite the Lord's Prayer was an oath, and we don't recite it as poetry. If you get my meaning.
We don't take it as seriously as we would an oath.
Sorry?
We don't take it as seriously as we would an oath.
Well, but how many? I mean, we don't take oaths very seriously anymore, anyway, right?
Well, some of us don't. What I'm saying, I guess, is that the whole concept of what we call the Lord's Prayer has become a frivolous exercise, and it carries no weight, no meaning, and we do it through it's like push the button and it comes out with no thought to what it means.
Well, okay, maybe wrote. I agree with you. That's what I'm trying to say. I guess that's a fine way to say it. I think that's why, for me, to have looked at the Lord's Prayer with an understanding maybe of what some of the Aramaic interpretations could be was very enlightening, enriching, because it's like me to look at it again, right, and see it in a more poetic way, to use the word you used earlier, which gives it more resonance, and I can connect more with it, as opposed to that superficial rote sort of way that we've been saying in the past. So the fascinating thing to me is you don't have to go anywhere new, you just have to see in a new way what's already there, been in front of your eyes for, well, as scripture for a long time.
Amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
That prayer talks about cleansing, right? And it constantly, if you read the words of Jesus carefully, he's constantly talking about cleansing. He's constantly talking about freeing ourselves from the entanglements. When he talks about, go back to the Matthew 28, when he talks about baptizing in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, he's talking about cleansing them from all of the preconceived ideas of who the Father is, of who the Son and the Holy Ghost, etc. So he's talking about getting rid of our preconceived religious ideas about how things are supposed to be, and allowing things
something different.
So then
So
I,
that means on a mental level, we have to get out of our own way and allow those deeper parts of our own mind to influence our conscious thinking, as opposed to trying to do it the other way, which just implants confusion as opposed to allowing it to be cleared out. And that's difficult because it's such a reflexive action for us to try to think our way out of stuff. And it's not that you should think, it's that you should be wary about what you think influences your ability to receive from the source of your thought in the first place.
Say that again.
So it's not that we shouldn't think, it's that we should be aware of how and what we think influences or affects our ability to receive from the source of thought in the first place.
so, but I think the big challenge for all of us then is how. It's the how. It's not that can be understood intellectually. So the how then, I think
So
that's
how,
why at
as
least
I said
that's
many times though.
but that's
It's
why in the
always. Oh, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say that's why for me anyway it was so clear in the Buddhist tradition with the Zen, particularly with the Zen, there was a technique. Now that was just a technique. That was just a tool. You had Jesus going into the wilderness and then coming back. You had the Buddha going into the forest and staying with the what am I calling them? The others who were there, and then coming out of the forest, enlightened and saying you don't got to go through all that. But the technique was necessary for him to get past it. So the question I think we all have is what's the technique? Which is why everybody buys thousands of books that that tell you to sit down, be quiet, find a space, that kind of thing, which are designed to help you get into that process, but not the end of the process, right? Because the other joke used to, not joke, but the other funny story used to be anybody can get enlightened on the top of a mountain in Tibet. The question is if you can hold that sense of enlightenment in the middle of a traffic jam in Manhattan at rush hour, right? So that's. But
If you can't, you are not a master yet. You are still in the process.
Right. So I'm not suggesting you go sit down in the middle of a traffic jam and find out, but.
What the desire itself will attract the technique.
Right.
And that's why it talks about making them disciples, discipline, because regardless of the technique, without discipline, it's not going to work anyway. So discipline is everything.
But I think
it
it
talks
built.
about teaching them to observe all things. It's talking about discipline them to the concept that you've been taught. Show them how to be disciplined. And my technique may be different than yours, but the whole concept of discipline doesn't change. Regardless of the technique, you have to be disciplined, and you have to know what you desire during that process of being disciplined.
I think that's why in most techniques, isn't it? There's usually a counselor advisor. It's the individual who can really master that on his own, so to speak.
And that's what leadership and what we call the holy man or the mentor is all about.
I think that's one of our great weaknesses. We don't know where are those mentors. That's the thing. And culturally,
Well, you don't have mentors if you don't have values, and if you don't know what your values are, it's very difficult to have a mentor. I read the leadership of the Lakota, and the values are established first, and the first value that's established is that of character, and your character is determined by your relationship to the community, to the society itself, but not those who can take care of themselves, but to the least of the society. And it is in that it is from that the other values in the society grows, and now you know what you're mentoring somebody to be or
right now we're in a discussion. And during the course of the discussion, it's different than a class in that in classes or even in motivational speaking, what we find is that one size fits all, as opposed to being in the seeing that one size does not fit all. And that my what I respect was because destination is the same. That's what society for.
And the difference between like a class in a traditional sense and something like we're doing right now is that in a class you're learning the information and there it is. And the purpose of any and all discussions like this is that the information is designed to help you connect to what is in you. So it's always with the intent that it relaxes your chaotic intellect that's confused constantly enough time to give it, or to give what is deeper inside of you time to fill that space that is created by you relaxing your normal way of thinking.
Which means that you're motivated by desire as opposed to being motivated by ego.
Yes. So your desire is what is deeper in you than your more surface level ego or whatever else. So all you have to do is feel it, and it will subconsciously begin to put things together, even while your thinking mind doesn't know how to piece that together, because it can't know how to do it, because your mind doesn't start there, it starts deeper. It has to start from the deep place and then come to the front, not the other way around.
That's why the Hebrew differentiate between the mind and the heart. The heart is that deeper place of desire, whereas the mind is that place of ego.
Yep.
So as you were saying last week, I think it was last week, we were talking about being able to transcend intellect and arrive at that place of intuitiveness.
Again,
And that's one of the things I want to go into as much as possible. I'll probably do it all again when we actually get there, or when I actually get there in December, but yeah. Because intellect is a very important tool, but it is in service to what comes before it. So everything that we need to know about how to actually do this, how to actually reconnect, is within us as our own mental and physical processes. So when they say know thyself, they're really talking about sit and feel how your own being operates. Because the whole process can be understood from that. Because we are, as we always say, a microcosmic copy of the macrocosm. So when you are thinking, your surface, well, not surface level, but like your unconscious thoughts arise from something deeper, a desire or an urge or a movement of the will. So in the process of enlightenment, we are actually unlocking our ability to operate at those deeper levels or with those deeper levels, as opposed to always feeling like we are being tossed and turned on the waves of our subconscious or whatever.
Hey, this is Rena. I don't see the recording icon that I saw last week. Are we sure we're recording this?
Yes, we are.
Okay, I just saw it on my Skype last week and I didn't see it this week. So. Okay.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So in going back to beginning, the first movement or the first purpose was oneness, connectedness. And so I'm thinking, as you were saying just now about each one, we have to sit still enough to go inside ourselves to find our desire. Our desire is on connectedness and oneness, and not necessarily what I can do for me or how I can fix this situation that I'm in. That's when our higher self can begin to teach us the direction we need to go.
Yes, and that's also when those very same problems that we always be like, oh, I gotta fix, begin to fix themselves in terms of how we experience it.
Because we recognize that it's a something we must go through to get to that place of realizing that it really isn't all about that situation.
Yes. See, everyone, every individual human, as we see them, does not have to do this. At the onset, Nick was talking about critical mass. And critical mass is not measured in numbers. Neither is it measured in volume. Critical mass when we reach critical mass, we won't know it until we're there. But critical mass is a sense of a place of awareness where there are people who are disciplined enough to realize the unicity of it all. Because when you look at it, the disciples were told to go teach all nations. That doesn't say all nations. It says the whole human race. And when you look at teaching the whole human race, it's not about teaching individual people. It's about putting enough in the macro of an awareness or the sense of being one until it is absorbed or picked up or at least reflected upon by the masses. So could it very well be that what we're approaching December 21st is an opportunity for critical mass to be achieved not in numbers or volume, but by a sense of awareness or desire. Nicholas.
Yes, sir. And part of actually the main purpose of everything I wanted to go over was to implant that desire in us so that when that time period comes and goes by, we will be able to attract what we desire into this experience without needing to think about it in the normal way we usually try to think about stuff. So that whole, I want to get into that as well. That whole time period, all of it is just straight science. And it's the science of how the reality that we see on the outside of us is actually something that is projected out from within us. So when you look up and see the stars and the planets and all that stuff, you're looking into the physical, or at the physical symbols of what's called the heavens. So those higher places in awareness.
So when we look at the planets in the physical, we're looking at the sense of enlightened awareness. With the planets being online, that's representative of the chaotic condition that we experience. With alignment, then that's indicative of incentive again. It's the idea of the availability of enlightenment at a place where it hasn't been for the last 26,000 years. So it is this enlightenment 26,000 years ago that the mind and others were able to do what they did in terms of charting the universe and building pyramids, etc. So we're back at this place again, or have opportunity to do that at this point of alignment, because energy is light, light is energy, and it's the energy for the whole universe. Am I missing?
That's it. And the thing with it is it sends whatever we ask. So we gotta ask right.
And maybe asking right is simply having the desire for enlightenment, as opposed to labeling what we want.
Yeah.
I think that's how we got in trouble in the beginning, as opposed to, rather than desiring them to follow the course that the Creator desired, we follow the course that we else. And now we don't, other than desire itself, for the purpose of enlightenment.
So that's walking through our insanity. Desire. Pit we dug we have to stop desiring things, go back one step. Okay, let's go back and change our desire in the first place. One step, and we just keep going back. And understand how, from the points we get back to, our reality is created from that point, or those points.
So when we look at it, the reason that Buddha, Jesus, or people of that nature are remembered, as opposed to those who desire the wealth of the world in terms of being very rich and dominating people. The reason they are remembered the way they are is because their energy still flows. And it's a positive energy, as opposed to that of a negative energy, greed. The only purpose is to get rich and live better than everyone else, or to dominate everyone else. The energy from those people are less prevalent in terms of members than is those of what we term as the men of holiness.
Yep. They did that exact thing. They drew all that into the earth, and then it just spread out like ripples on a pond.
Yeah, and it stays, is what you're saying, I think, Pastor Richard, as opposed to the other, what do you want to call it, benefits that are coming that are more from man, which tend to have a life expectancy. You can create we know famous figures in history, but we have a sense that they were influential for a time. They changed society, they created some invention, whatever it is. But the sense that the energy of all that is not the same as these others who we hold in a sort of special place. I suppose in a Jungian way, maybe you could say, because they change the collective unconscious, if you like.
And continue to do so.
And that's not something that is like a battery that wears out. I mean, it's there. You can lose contact, but it doesn't mean it's not there and available.
And by changing the collective unconsciousness, they tapped into those deeper places from which the rest of reality flowed. And over time, again, we lost contact with most of what was originally said, but through our own actions. Carl Jung, my favorite quote of his is, "I don't need to believe, I know."
Yeah.
So he said, "I don't need to believe, I know." So that's where we're.
That's one of the things that I remember that was Jung's sayings, but that's one of the things that I believe for quite some time, that you have to get beyond the point of belief. You have to get beyond the place of faith. You have to get beyond the place of confidence to the place of knowing. Because when you know, or when you have confidence in something, or when you believe something, it's almost like you're detached from it, or you wait for it to come to you and you to it. But when you know something, there is no space between you and it. It's like a cleavage, because and there's nothing that convince you otherwise. I remember when I saw this miraculous thing that happened when I was in Haiti. When I got back, I was talking about it, and there were those who said to me that that's impossible, or I doubt that. Well, it was too late for them to tell me that. If they had said that to me prior to my going, it may have had a different effect. But after I saw it, after I experienced it for myself, now I know. So there you can do to change the direction I'm in. I'm heading in. I was saying to George this morning that I am so committed to what I know to be until if everybody walked away from me and I had to stand all alone, I would still travel in the same direction, because I've seen too much, I've experienced too much, and I cannot change who I am because someone chooses not to follow me. To me, that's what knowing is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? sense, everybody? Does anybody have any questions? Or, yeah, we go.
Yes.
Okay.
So then, if we're going to truly experience this flow or this influx of balanced energy, then the preparation. The preparation is not in I'm gonna breathe 5 times a day. I'm gonna pray 6 times a day. I'm gonna turn my face to the east when I do it, or I'm gonna lay prostrate on the floor and do it. That's not it at all. Preparation is feeling, sensing, and desiring to be one with whatever is to come and accepting it for what it is. Preparation is feeling what you are, your role prior to the advent of the influx of energy. And by role, we talked about in the sense of what you know you have to teach in December. And knowing that it's not time for it yet, even though we thought it was, but circumstances let us see it's not. And rather than being all upset about it and being out of shape, we go with the flow because we know when the time has come. That's when it would happen. So you do what, for example, we had no idea that you were at this place of teaching these concepts about energy prior to the Skype thing, but we knew it was time for Skype. And we knew it was time for you to begin teaching. We tried this, but it worked out when it was supposed to. That's what I'm talking about. So every one of us have a role, but we can't force it. Neither can we sit back and say, okay, I want to know what my purpose in life is. No, your purpose is in front of you. Just flow with what you feel.
In your heart.
Yes, what you feel in your heart, flow with that. It's dangerous to flow with what you think in your mind. It's very dangerous. That's what gets us in trouble. But when you begin to flow with what you feel in your heart, even though sometimes you end up in a circumstance that may seem bad to you, maybe not necessarily so. Sometimes I believe that regardless of what circumstance a person encounters, no matter how dark or dreary or mean or evil it may seem to be, I believe that it's necessary for that person to go through that to get to a place of where they need to be. And where they need to be is not necessarily a place where you choose to be. But you realize when you get there that there's a need for you to be there.
Grow up.
Yeah, that's right.
And grow up.
Right. Circumstances, situation. That's it exactly.
Well, let me ask, does the phrase you used, my purpose in life, still make sense when you have a sense or a sense of connection or a feeling to what life's purpose is? You know what I'm trying to say? The idea of my is the last stumbling block. I'm here to share my enlightenment. It seems to me the people really have, or I'm here to teach, all those things aren't so hard-edged and separate. It's all part of, it's like knowledge. Knowledge is purposeless if it's not shared. That's the beauty of the internet. Right? People are throwing everything they can out there and not doing it only for a sense of personal gain, I guess you'd say.
When I talk about the sense of mind, I talk about it in the same sense of for God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes should not perish but have everlasting life. That doesn't say that. It says God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, so whoever believes in Himself shall not perish. So I'm talking about in the sense of even in who you are. And when I talk about the sense of separated, I talk about in the sense of unicity among all of us. Because my purpose is your purpose and your purpose is mine because they're intertwined. It's like right now, Nick is dealing with this the idea of this concept of energy, and that's not his concept. But what happens is that he's the piece of the mind or the us that is bringing it. He's the cell in the body that causes the heart to beat, as opposed to the cell being that causes the liver to function. In that sense, of mind.
Say my, as long as you are coming with some understanding of what you recognize your own role to be or your own desires to be. Because whatever your desires are will add to the total thing. And more than that, once you get closer to who and what you are and recognize that there is not any separation between what you perceive to be other people, when you say mine, you are saying the only desire, because your desires are the desires of the source, of the creator. Though we don't usually know that yet.
Well, I mean, to me, that makes me want to go into the idea of self a bit, and I'm immediately taken to this idea of a grain of sand and a beach, a drop of water and an ocean, because I think that's also something in our life. How do you maintain a sense that there is self, but it's in a totally different context or understanding than what we think it is? Right? We're all walking around like we're pieces of sand, so to speak. I don't know how to make that analogy.
Well, I perceive it as the grain of sand is indicative of self when we talk about it from a material point of view. And a drop of water in the ocean is self experience point of view, because there is no line of separation there. But with the grain of sand, it is.
I wanted to.
Well, acceptable to misinterpretation, I think, because it's a harder, cruder. I mean, a grain has edges, right? You say a drop, it merges. But at the end of the day, it's the same concept.
It makes it easier to understand, but yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah. It makes it harder.
Because
I think it makes it harder. How do you translate a grain of sand into a beach, but still the grain of sand is part and parcel to, now you're in the, anyway. I think that's a tough one. The water is easier for me, but.
no, right. I meant the water is easier, but like the whole thing about it being difficult or easy is because we like to see distinction. And distinction is part of perception, not part of reality. It's part of our reality. So here, let me draw something, because I like drawing something. Nikki, did you have a question?
Yeah, a statement to what Richard was saying. I wanted to say that that it's kind of back to what Pastor was saying about the whole does not have to get it for the concept of love or the concept of oneness to actually enter into the earth. It's those individuals that say, I am my brother's keeper, that says, if I work on me, if I focus on changing me and understanding me as I relate to the whole, and changing the whole as a better, making it a better place or making it a better world or whatever we want to say, then your individual desire is to make the whole better. And so you don't separate yourself, and yet at the same token, you work individually. I mean, I'm just thinking personally. You work individually to make the whole a better, so you don't lose yourself in that, but at the same token, the whole gains. Do you kind of understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
It's almost like your individual desire is so much enmeshed in the whole that you don't even get caught up in your individualness in that sense.
right.
Well, I think that whole.
Actually, can everybody see what I just drew? All the people who can't see.
Yes, it is.
Oh, it's
Okay.
It's minimized where we are. We may have to lose one of you.
Oh, say that again. What should happen? Should I just get rid of it and just describe
No,
it?
that's all right as long as we can get back, I guess. But we lost
Yeah,
that. We
I can
lost
go
the.
back easily, but So here we are. Everybody can see that? Who can see it? Here we are, down here, right? So we'll call this sort of bottom level the physical experience. So we see this space. We see this space between us. And we think, oh, because that space is there, we are separate. Okay? But when you begin to unlock a little bit more about how reality is structured, everything extends from the same source up here at the top. We are connected up here. And as it expands outward, it appears that it grows more distant, but it's not. So distance, separation, all that is a product of perception. So when you go deeper into your own self, when you go back up to where you come from, this separation gets narrower and narrower. Does that make sense?
So that's back to the beginning.
Yeah. And beginning is up here.
And that's what we call going back in time. Because without actual physical objects, there's no such thing as time, because time is based upon the amount of the distance.
Right.
So if there's no distance, there's no time.
If there's no change in anything, there's no way to measure it.
Right? It just is what it is.
Yep. So the thing I drew last week, or the week before that, which I will try to explain as fully as I can, probably at another time, but that pyramid thing with all the circles in it, and way down at the bottom was all the it just expands and keeps dividing like a cell. So we are kind of stuck and confused by this, because we look at it and see, oh, look at all the little individual pieces. There's no possible way we can be connected, right? There's a literal infinity of individual pieces. But the problem is, we come to that conclusion because we rely on our intellect. We rely on what our physical senses bring to our awareness, without fully experiencing or understanding what that awareness is. So when you create that space within all this chaotic stuff down here, when you clear out enough space within yourself, there is a chance for what comes from beginning to implant itself directly.
So the whole idea, just by example, okay, the whole idea of, let's say, American and American pie, where cultures are merged, and where people become Americans, like America represents oneness, okay? Then that is man's best effort at recreating unity on oneness. That's the best effort at doing that. And we see what kind of chaos that's caused. Is that?
Yeah, you're right. And I think there's people who are more responsible for that chaos than others. But we're all complicit in it. So, we'll get to that. So, did that make sense, anyone? Or, yeah, anyone? Okay. So, let me go back really quick. So, to this original thing. So, can everybody hear me or see me?
Yes.
I'll try to draw it big too. So, back to where we were. So, beginning. Okay, so. I just want to deal with this because I want to incorporate the rest of the stuff when we get to it. But so at the beginning, that very first word, the word in Hebrew begins with the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, et. And let me do something fancy. Okay. So bet means house. So the very, very, very first thing that happened was a space was generated or created. So when we were just talking about the space that we have to create, all we're doing is emulating the very process of this creation. So imagine all this white space over here is the totality, like undefinable, can't think about it, all you can do is just know it. But during the process of creation, which is the process of that original totalness dividing itself, to allow for things like the experience of separation. The very first step in that process was the formation of the house, the letter bet. So for that, we would draw a circle. So it's the interior distinguished from the exterior. So does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So the reason that we do that, in terms of our own thoughts anyway, is to separate out, or at least clear out the chaotic, confusing process of thinking that we like to attach to in order to just be quiet. To create that space within which we have the ability to just feel, to just be, to just become aware of what is deeper than the normal process of thinking and the normal process of thought. Does that make sense? Okay. Everybody over at Foundation, does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So, and I want to get into this and of course, but this is just a conceptual diagram, right? But this is the origin and basis of geometry. So geometry is the, I like to call it the mathematics of the right brain, because it deals with relationships than it does absolute measurable values. Because the truth is, there is nothing that is absolutely measurable. Nothing. Because you cannot encapsulate energies. You can't do that. You can only do that in relative levels of ignorance, aka physical perception. So we don't perceive reality as it is, we perceive an aspect of it. So we experience an aspect of it. And within that experience, we can come up with whatever rules we want. But those rules describe it, or they are our attempts to describe it. As for what it is, our intellectual attempts to describe it don't even come close to it. But anyway, so this is where geometry comes from. All it is just a diagrammatic description of relationships between energies. Very first thing is the house. So I have not actually gone into the whole word myself, although I do have an impression. So check it out. The next letter is Resh. So that's like the R in the Hebrew word, which is so that's the first one. The next one is in Hebrew. There's no vowels basically, which I'm sure you all know. So R is like the boundary between the inside and the outside, for lack of a better term, anyway. Oh, oops. So it's like the film. It's like the film on the outside of a bubble. That is the distinguishing, for lack of a better term again, line. But anyway, my point that was that each letter in this word and this letter in this process gives insight into how it is that creation came about. And maybe I shouldn't. Actually, why not? So we all know what a hologram is, right? And Pastor Reggie, you talked about this before, but if you picture this circle kind of like a soap bubble, everybody still with me?
Yep.
Okay, so in the process, if you picture this circle, the house, the space within which creation can take place. If you picture it like a soap bubble, you know how the surface of the soap bubble has all those beautiful designs on it and stuff? Just because of how it's made. A hologram is just like the thing that's producing it. So, and somebody just stop me, because I see where I'm going, but I don't necessarily see how to explain it in a way that can bring everyone else with me, so somebody let me know. But, so if this is the house, as light comes into it, it recreates as a hologram an image of what was in the beginning.
Okay.
That
So
makes
you're
sense?
saying that we are indeed the image of what was in the beginning. And regardless of how we feel like we're separate from it, it does not deny the holographic nature of our being.
Right?
Okay,
So-
go.
Let me stop right there, because I'm about to start putting too much stuff on the screen. But does that make sense anyway?
It makes sense to me.
Say it again for me.
So, here, let me put my face up really quick. So, everybody see me?
Yep.
Yeah.
So, hologram, if you shine light through it,
That's fine.
all it does is recreate another dimension, the same image that is encoded in. But as Pastor said, break it up into many little pieces. Each piece, if you shine light through it, produces the same image. So even though the original thing, when you put like only showed one of the images it was supposed to produce, if you break it to 1,000 pieces, each of those little pieces will still show that whole complete thing. So what that means is the fact that we see ourselves as separate, distinct individuals is exactly an illusion. It is exactly a product of perception and the fact that we have broken up our original, in the beginning, knowledge or perception into all these distinct, separate things that become confusing and chaotic. But it all looks exactly the same, and it all reconstitutes the exact same thing when pieces are brought back together.
So you're saying that if the big bubble breaks into many little bubbles, then we see ourselves as each one of us seeing the hologram in the little bubble. And because of that, we see ourselves as separate. When in fact, it's really an illusion.
That's right,
Because of the way the light reflects and all that.
right?
Is that what you're saying?
So, it's really not broken up, it just appears to be.
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
there's really no separate little images in the bubbles. It's just the way it's broken up because of the light.
Sheldon, you can't think.
Okay.
Oh, I just was switching back and forth. But so it's the same thing as looking in a house of, if anyone's gone in a house of mirrors and you see yourself, but you see yourself from all these different angles and like in an infinite number of pictures of yourself. The reality is only of the one image, but you're separating them like there's me over there's me over here, I'm back there as well.
Well, that's probably a good analogy because just as that, you can lose, if you're looking at somebody else in the House of Mirrors, you can very quickly not know where the real person is vis-a-vis the mirrors. So the metaphor there would be sense of self, personality, where's the real person, so to speak. So why not for yourself? I was just wondering with the bubble thing, though, if you could do it in reverse. Really, it's make sort of something comedic. We're all, Lewis Black once said, we're all little snowflakes. No one's the same. Okay, so we're all little bubbles. So going inside yourself, you, through the holographic process, you see the big bubble that you really are. Is that what you're trying to say? Yeah.
You see that those little bubbles are just illusions because of the way the light is refracting. They're not really there. It's just a big bubble, isn't it?
Close to the mic.
Who?
Whoever's talking, sitting close to the mic.
I think it may be the quality of the signal.
No, I hear you clearly,
Yeah,
but the other person before you,
Audrey?
yes.
Where's the mic?
No,
I think she's sitting close to the mic, because
Oh,
I hear it twice.
okay. I won't touch that.
But yeah, let me jump in. That whole thing I just drew was to help get the concept. You could draw it any number of ways, but I like that mirror analogy because if you didn't know any better, you would lose yourself in a house of mirrors, especially if there were other people in there, and there are other people in this physical perception. So the way that you regain your own sanity, or you prevent yourself from losing your sanity in the house of mirrors, where you see just millions of reflections, is to divert your attention from those reflections. So you close your eyes and you feel yourself as an individual instead of trying to find yourself out there in your reflections.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's the chaos of life.
So individuality is a gift, so to speak. It's okay to be an individual, right? I mean, I'm not saying that as a I guess I'm having a hard time putting it into words, but the whole purpose that beginning created us was to allow us to be individuals, but one with the whole, right?
Yes. So it's part of the purpose that you experience yourself as an individual. But
But I like what you said, because it made me think that fundamental question we keep asking: what's the purpose of life? What's the purpose of this experience? So if it's to find our way back, so to speak, it's almost like it's a big outward bound thing. You're just getting dropped on an island and told, find your way home. But
it is. And you know how many times we're going to have to go through the experience of wandering through the earth looking for it when we didn't realize it was right here in us the whole time?
All right.
how many
Many
times?
times it takes.
Right.
See,
6, 8? How many times?
we talk about,
I know.
when we talk about being an individual,
Buddhist.
I'm sorry, when we talk about being a woman, it doesn't mean that we're not an individual thought. Because the very word Elohim itself is plural. So it is one but many. So we are individuals, but we are aware that we are Elohim as individuals. That we were created gods. That's what the scripture says. I say that ye are Elohim. I say that you're gods. So it's like when we talk about the Father, we're not talking about the Lord or Yahweh. We're talking about Elohim. The one, yet we are many. And the many is the image of the one. So it doesn't mean that we all, walk the same, talk the same, and think the same. What it does mean is that we're aware of the same things. And that is our origin, or who we were created to be. Does that make sense?
So that's why we're allowed to, or I guess the laws of the universe say, you're allowed to be or use your individuality in the way that you choose, but understand that because you are part of a whole, whatever energy you create with that, it has to come back to you because you are a part of a whole.
Well,
Well, your actions affect yourself as well as the whole, and that's why your energy has to come. That's why you sort of kind of have to reap what you sow. You have to, your energy comes back to you or whatever, because what you're doing unto yourself.
Yeah, and that's kind of it, because as an individual, you will have to begin to question your own individuality. So, and that begins the process of returning back, because we were not meant to stay here forever, or stay at this, stay within this narrow band of experience. Not to get rid of it, but to fulfill it. Yeah.
when we look at it from, I look at it from the perspective of the natural. When you begin to clump group people together who think alike or who have the same goals in mind, or let's say training the group of people to do a certain thing, they move as a unit. They're individual, but they move as one. And it's simply because all of them are aware of their role in performing the task at hand. And if you can take that and make it applicable to the spiritual, we move as one because we're aware of the task at hand. And the task at hand is not making it comfortable for me as an individual, but for us as a group. The task is not for me to reap the wealth of the natural, but to be the wealth of the spiritual. And so it gives us a greater sense of the God that we are created to be, as opposed to, as the psalmist writes, diminishing ourselves into being human. Yeah, because to be human is to be selfish. Is to be selfish.
Yep. So does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So to be human means to be selfish. means to contract into a narrow, tight, dense, limited experience of self out of our desire to create something for ourselves.
Let's go all the way back to one.
But I
The
think,
house that I bet, that's the space where Aesop contracted and created that space. And that is why, even to this day, that we talk about the idea of love and compassion began at home, in the house, and spread exponentially. And so whatever is created in this house or in this space that we've been given, that's what spreads exponentially. And we create not the roads so much as the lives that we live by virtue of what we create in that space. Like right now, the world that I'm living in is different than the world that I would be in had I chosen not to come to Philadelphia, but to remain there in London. So it's different, but the journey is toward the same goal.
Yes.
So would you say that each one of us have the ability to create the space called the house bed, right? We have the ability to do that. But what we do with that ability determines the outcome, hell or heaven, in terms of how we live these lives or how these lives are played out. Because I noticed something here. It says that that began and created Elohim, heaven, and earth. It does not say anything about hell. So hell must be a subset of earth.
Yep. And that's why it was always, hell was always conceived in the ancient cultures and stuff as under the earth.
And they're a subset of earth. So by virtue of it being a subset of earth, the way for hell to be purified, destroyed, extracted, or whatever, means that you have to move beyond being human. Once you move beyond being human, then hell doesn't exist anymore.
Right?
yeah, there's nothing, yeah, what you just said then, that explains the misunderstanding of the idea that you're condemned to hell for eternity. If, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The only thing that could be explained as is until you get it right, you have to repeat.
Yeah, here on earth.
I was just thinking about that.
But it's not that way. It doesn't mean it's much more negative, pejorative, and frightening. You're not going to burn in the flames in perpetuity. You're going to. It's just a badly expressed way of saying you have to repeat it till you get it right.
Well, actually,
but there's a possibility of hope in that. There's a possibility of, okay, fine, I got to do it again. I'll do it again. But and this time I'll try to get it right.
Hope is not that. Hope is in Revelation, where it says that in hell, death and hell will cast into the lake of fire. When you look at that, it says that death and hell, the lake of fire, is a place of repose. It's a place of paradise. It's a place where you go to relax. So the purification takes place. The idea of the hell that you created and the death that you brought into being is purified into something that's life. All of those, all the confusion is taken out of it during this course of purification in the lake of fire. So in the lake of fire is nothing like what we have been taught it is. Fire represents the passion of energy for recompense and for restoration.
Yep. And fire also speaks to desire.
Yeah.
So there is an experience that is very hellish, but the thing is, it's a product of our own creation, not some place.
Hellish is trying to find a job, can't get one.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, hellish is someone with education but can't afford to because of student loans. You know, hellish is something that's free. And the reason it was hellish is because of the value that we add to it. If we did not put add the value to it and make it be something that's beyond what it should be, then it would be hellish.
Yep. So that's how we can flip the whole thing inside out. What was at first something that appeared to be something meant to destroy us is our greatest ally.
They that he may find bad, you may find good. You know? So I guess we could, today, this moment, we can begin to transpose hell by virtue of when we face those things that appear to be hellish, we recognize them as opportunities, as opposed to being destructive. And that in itself changes it. When I want to do something and it doesn't happen the way I want it to happen, that was the time I would be frustrated. But now it doesn't frustrate me. And the reason it doesn't is because I don't see it as being hellish in nature. It doesn't plague me. It does what it's supposed to be, so I keep living my life. Keep it moving.
Yep, just let it
be.
Man, all the chaos and the confusion that comes with thinking too much. The whole thing we've been talking about creating that space is just learning to release our grasp of what we think is going to solve our internal problems. And it helps if we know how to use it, or we know what to think, or how to use it to help create that space. But if our whole purpose is to attain or obtain more individual thoughts, in some sense that will fill that space that we feel, it might in a way, but not in a way that we really want it. Say that again?
Let it be that way. That's the way you want it to be.
It never is the way you want it to be. You're right. It's the way you want it.
Yes.
It's the way it's supposed to be. And that's without regard of where you, quote unquote, find yourself. Think about that. Where you I found myself caught up in some things that I shouldn't be in, which means that you recognize that you are more than what you caught up in. Entanglements, sin, etc. So we speak about ourselves from a spiritual perspective. Well, we don't live that perspective on which we speak of ourselves. If you find yourself caught up into something, okay, now that you found yourself, what is yourself going to do about it? What is self going to do about it? Is self going to stay there and allow the thing to overtake it? Or is self going to be dominant in that situation? So the whole journey is about finding self. Find out who you are.
Yep. And
now are you done?
say that again.
What'd you say?
I couldn't hear you say that. Can you say that again?
I'm going to talk about why you nominates me. Maybe Sheldon will figure it out.
Oh, okay.
Now I believe we are experiencing lag.
Yeah, a little bit.
Duplication of your voice. Yeah.
How come you're so quiet, Rainier? I mean, it's nice looking at your picture, but...
You can see my picture?
Yes!
Because I have a crying baby who just went to sleep.
3 hours earlier.
Huh? Are you done with it? Are you done?
Oh, for now.
Okay, that's what I'm talking about. Of course you're not done. Yeah.
Nick, it was on one other thing when you had that picture drawn up that looked like a mountain, and you had the larger boulder-looking things at the top, and you had it like it was little dots at the bottom that just looked like sediment or whatever. Well, with how the ancients viewed heaven and earth, and they looked at heaven as just being the cosmos. Of course, the cosmos would be the boulders. And then when we talk about hell being under the earth, I was thinking that would pretty much be just under the sediment as far as where that person was looking at themselves and seeing themselves as an individual, or their lack of awareness that would have made them to perceive themselves as being in hell.
Right. And I'm talking about that cosmos stuff as well, because so yeah, that whole shape, that whole pyramid thing that I drew describes that whole process, right?
Yeah.
No, I'm not gonna draw it yet. But so we got pyramid shape. So that's the expansion from the source or beginning, and then the return, which is the inverted pyramid shape.
Mm-hmm.
Lay those two on top of each other, and you got the Star of David. And the Star of David really is telling you that time is not a factor in this. So when we think of expansion and return, we think of like a linear process. No, those two symbols are on top of each other. All this exists now. But we'll get to that.
Okay. That's the teaser.
So we're,
And that's the
okay, here's something to throw out just for the heck of it. Going back to Dante's allegory, where do we get the idea of purgatory?
I'm sorry, that's exactly the other thing that I meant to say that I forgot. Thank you.
I do have a function.
So yeah, hell exists in two forms in the Bible: Sheol, the grave, and Hades, Greek Hades. Neither of those are as bad as what we think of when we think of as hell. Neither of them. All that torture, and it pains me to even realize that that is the idea that has been sold to us. All that torture and stuff comes out of Dante.
That's it. Dante's
And Hades is not that bad a place. I mean, it's not great. You wouldn't want to stay there forever. But no, the whole idea that you go someplace where you are tortured is just absolutely sickening, actually.
Well,
But
my
then-
question is always, how, if we're spirit beings, how can a physical body be tortured for all eternity? That's the part that I'm confused. What confuses me about hell and people believing that we're spirit beings, that we are energy that can neither be consumed or destroyed, and yet there's a place where we can burn and this stuff can continue on and on and on and on.
Don't try to start introducing logic in church, because I was reading this little girl was in, I don't know if it was true or not, but some story about this little girl who was in Sunday school or whatever, and she was like, "Can you burn a ghost?" And the teacher was like, "No, you can't burn a ghost. It's not a spirit, or it is a spirit. Fire can't hurt it." And she was like, "Okay, so how do we get hurt in hell?" And then of course,
Thank you, little one. Out of the mouth
what
of
you say,
babes.
And the teacher, the bell rang, and the teacher said, "I'll take it." Yeah, but I think you gotta, I always thought the whole Dante thing, you have to go back and look at the time in history, all the energies and what was happening and how that came out of that understanding. You know what I mean?
Some of the images really are earthly images. What I saw from that was people indulging in selfishness, and ultimately that selfishness consuming them. And I think ultimately, if we do not choose oneness, our selfishness can consume us. But my ideal of consumption is that we get sucked back into the whole. we're never separated from that whole, we just lose our
No,
individuality.
but all I'm saying is that the imagery that Dante's work created, I think, was alive in its time, and the church was vicious about trying to create that sense of do it our way or else, right? Which is that whole idea of forcing the understanding, or even if you have to pay lip service, which is what most people did so they wouldn't be burned or whatever, right? I care how you behave, not what you really believe, and that's what this is not all about.
What does tell you, the church accepted it because it kept people in line.
Exactly. It's just amazing to me that things could go that far, that fast in history to that extreme, and then the whole. There's still an Inquisition. They just call it a little differently now and do different things. But
Well, you would have to.
the
You
Pope
would have
used to
to
be the.
kill for 1 or 2 generations before the third would believe. Because during the Inquisition, you kill one parent, now you bring your child to believe, so they will be killed. That's how it worked.
Yeah. It's
So,
amazing how it got to be so coercive, I guess I'm saying. Although coming up under Rome maybe in its history.
let me say one thing about Dante. His and it's in that book that Mark Booth wrote, Secret History of the World. But Dante's whole thing was called the Divine Comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He knew of the absurdity of this whole idea.
So he just took it to the extreme as a mirror, maybe.
Exactly.
Okay.
And opportunities saw it. So if they were to make it a reality for people, then that would be an easier way to control them. And that's what happened. I mean, and the thing still happens to this day. Not just with the whole concept of hell, but also with the idea of do it our way or we ostracize you. So it's no different. So now you're living in hell on earth because you feel like nobody wants to be bothered with you because of what you believe.
But then Nick, I don't remember the history. Was Dante's work considered blasphemous?
It wasn't. It wasn't. It wasn't. At the time, it
Or is
wasn't.
this over the heads of?
It's because they saw the value in what it could do.
Right, and that's what I would imagine. Like, if something contributes to your effort to maintain control or whatever, like, I don't think it would be seen as blasphemous. Because people who wrote this stuff were smarter than the people who were using it to control people.
Well, that's not changed. That's not changed. I mean, I read of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, and it doesn't come out the way it's applied in pieces for certain purposes. Same as the idea of survival of the fittest and the Industrial Revolution, all that kind of thing, right? It just rationalized certain politics that were looking for a reason for being, and then they found it that way. And then it was too late to say, wait, but that's not what it's all about. It didn't matter. They used it, they enforced it, they imposed it, and it created the chaos it creates, even now.
So, anyway, we done for the day?
Yep.
This is
All right, everyone. I will probably not see you next week, but December 1st, I'll be here.
okay. Residing. Hello.
I'm here.
Oh, okay.
That beginning have its way. Amen.
Amen. So let it be. Okay, see you next week.
All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello. Once again, okay, my name, I am Doug Maureen.